What's up, everybody? Welcome to my map design series, episode 3. I'm Impossible, and today we're going to be talking about spawns. How you should make your spawn zones, and where you should place your spawns in the map that you want to make. Now, hopefully you've watched the previous couple of episodes. Once again, I'm not just going to say, like, do this, not that. We're going to go over as many scenarios as is reasonable, and we're going to go over some general tips. So no matter what your map looks like, hopefully this video will help you make good spawns that people aren't going to hate. So, some general info about spawns. Some games use dynamic spawns, which means that the places you start on the map will not be where you always spawn. For example, Call of Duty, when you play Team Deathmatch. Any Call of Duty game in recent memory, or all of them, I'm not even sure. At least since Call of Duty 4, Team Deathmatch, you'll spawn in the initial spawn zones, but when you die, you will probably not respawn there. You'll respawn away from enemies-ish and near teammates-ish. The Call of Duty spawn algorithm will sometimes place you close to enemies on purpose or whatever, but that's the point. There's an algorithm that there's tons of spawn zones scattered around the map, and it just picks one to spawn you on at any given point. And a lot of big first-person shooter games use dynamic spawns, at least in Team Deathmatch. Some games like Skillwarz use static spawns for everything, which means that the places that you spawn at the beginning of the match is just where you spawn throughout the whole match. And there has to be a few different considerations when you're designing maps, where if you're designing for a game or a game mode that has static spawns versus dynamic spawns. And I say game mode, some games, like for example Call of Duty, some game modes, if you play Capture the Flag or Demolition, it still has dynamic spawns, but the spawn zones are so limited, you barely spawn any place else besides your initial spawn, that the map design philosophy, if you're designing for a specific game mode like that, where your game may have dynamic spawns, but the game type limits the spawns so much, you'll still want to use some of the principles in this video about designing a map mainly for static spawns, even if your game has dynamic spawns. In other words, if the game can spawn you anywhere around the map, or for the game mode, then that's dynamic spawns. If you're basically stuck in one part of the map to spawn the entire game or the entire round, then this video is for you, because that's what we're going to be discussing. So, which is easier to spawn trap? Well, you could probably guess that it's static spawns, because you always spawn in one place. It's kind of obvious, but the conclusion we draw from that is that if it's easier to spawn trap, versus static versus dynamic spawns on the same type of map, then you need to pay more attention to balance when you're designing the map. If you've ever played, most Call of Duty games have this to some extent, or if you're not familiar with that series, you can search on YouTube like Terminal Spawn Trap or Nuketown Demolition Spawn Trap or something like that, where the dynamic spawn, there's dynamic spawns, but the spawn system is either not designed well, or it's so limited in where it can spawn people that you can spawn trap the enemy team with some coordination. So, in a game with static spawns, if you don't pay attention to balance, then you'll kind of always be able to easily do that because the spawns never move. So, you as a map designer want to pay attention to balance so that people don't hate your map. And they won't hate your map because of the flow or the design or the looks of the map. They'll hate playing on it because they'll spawn in and die, and spawn in and die, and they can't get out of their spawn. So, at least when they're playing against a team that's a bit better than them. Ideally, you don't really want this. You want people playing your map to feel like gunfights are mainly fair. So, that's why we want to care about balance and care about making a good spawn system. So, practical ramifications of static spawns. I already went over this a bit, but here's some graphics. The left image here is the map standoff on Black Ops 2, and this is from a video by Drifter on YouTube, where the initial spawns and the most common spawns are these two red zones. If these get kind of filled up, Then a secondary zone is kind of roughly diagonal from that, where if this has people, you can't really see this. And these two look nearby, but there's actually kind of a wall between here, so there's not a whole lot of overlap. And if all this stuff is really clogged up, you can spawn in this house or spawn over here. So if there's enemies, or for some other reason there's the spawns are unsuitable in one of these parts, there's different places that you can spawn. In a game like Skillwarz, where there's static spawns, the spawning is just random. Now there's a bunch of different spawn points, but you can't actually you can't spawn a different place on the map. So if your map is designed where people can't get out of their spawn or don't have a good amount of mobility in their spawn, then they're going to just feel trapped. That's because they are. So the enemy spawn is always known. As you can probably, it's if the spawn never moves, then you always know where the enemies are going to spawn. That's pretty obvious, but once again, you think of the ramifications of that. If you always know where the enemies are going to spawn, then if you can lock that area down, then the enemies will never be able to get out of the spawn. They're never going to be able to spawn behind you. There's just whatever. If you know that where they're coming from one place, then that's that. And it's one of those things where you just need to keep that in mind, where if on your map the enemies are all spawning in one point, as they do, if you can lock that down too easily via having too many power points or having overpowered things in your map, or people just spawn right in the open or something, and we'll go over all this stuff more specifically in just a second. It's just not going to be super fun. And importantly, both sides of the map need to be roughly equally balanced, because you don't have a dynamic system where if one team gets to like the best part of the map and other people will spawn around them, and then let's say that other team forces themselves onto the best part of the map and that first team is now spawning in the less ideal parts. That can happen if you have dynamic spawns, but with static spawns, your map has to have some balance between the two. Otherwise, people are never going to want to play on one team, which kind of makes no sense. You don't have to necessarily have symmetry, but you do need to have some balance, some reasonable balance between the two. And sometimes you can only get that from playing the map, but you do want to try and design the map with that type of thing in mind. So here's some good examples of spawns. Prototype 1 on the left here. Spawn is right here. So what do we got going on? Well, you spawn behind a wall. That's pretty good. Right in the spawn here, you have some towers you can climb onto, so you can get to a pretty good position. You don't have to move super far. The spawn itself is pretty open. If there's an enemy standing here, and you spawn over here, you can just walk out and see them. There's nothing kind of blocking your way where you can't see around your own spawn. Likewise, Prototype 17 here. You do spawn kind of in the open back here, but this is a small map, so that's to be expected. You can't block everything off on a smaller map. You spawn kind of in the open, but once again, things are pretty visible. It's pretty easy to, right inside of your spawn, get to this defensive position in case the enemy team is coming on a bit strong. It's pretty easy to defend your own spawn, and it's pretty easy. And like I said, the spawn is pretty visible. It's pretty easy to see across the spawn, and there's not a whole ton of places to hide. Here's some bad examples. On the left, this is Prototype 26 in Skillwarz. The enemy team spawns in here, in this middle part here. The problem is, there's this part here, where there's no spawn points at. Also, this map is tiny. So, it's absolutely not difficult at all for an enemy to run up here and sit behind the enemy spawn without getting killed. And now, of course, if someone notices them, they'll probably get killed up here. But when people spawn in, if they don't run forward, they're going to be standing around here, looking for someone to shoot many times, or they'll just be running around here, and they'll end up getting shot in the back because of someone that was camping in their own spawn. So that's not good. And then Prototype 7 here on Skillwarz, one of the very much, I would say, one of the worst maps in the game in terms of spawning, because you spawn behind this wall, and the spawn is open. You can't see it from here, but the spawn's very open. However, it's so hard to defend. It's just impossible to defend your spawn because there's just nothing you can use. These containers these containers aren't even in the spawn. They're outside of the spawn. Are too far away and they're too tall to be able to shoot over most of the time. So you come out of your spawn, you just walk outside of this wall here, and you're just completely exposed. So if someone that's actually got a good camping spot, like up here or inside of this thing where there's containers and stuff, you can kind of peek around. Anyone just coming out of here is basically toast. So this demonstrates a few things that you don't want to do. So, as we've discussed here, what makes a good spawn? Well, it needs to be protected. In other words, you know, on a small map, you probably won't have a very well protected spawn, but anything even medium-sized, you want to have some protection from the rest of the map. It needs to be clear, which means that you can see throughout the spawn area to see if there's any enemies camping right in the spawn area. It needs to be defensible, which means that you can defend your own spawn. If the enemy team is better than you and you get pushed back all the way to your spawn, you have a way to fight back and you're not just trapped there. Excuse me. And the last one is that you should have some multiple exit routes. The multiple exit routes, that was all the maps I've shown there actually had them, so I kind of forgot to mention it. But I have seen people, we have at least one example in this PowerPoint, that have a spawn with just one exit route, which is just a little, you know, not very good. So we will go over examples of these, more specific examples right now. For example, protected, like I said. Now this is a small map, so it's kind of okay, but you just spawn in the open. Small map, like I said, that's fine, because it's small. Anything even medium-sized, do not just have people spawn in the wide open. It's like the most annoying thing to spawn in and have absolutely no protection from someone, from any enemy just happens to be looking at you, and when your spawn protection runs out after like 2 seconds, then they can just shoot you dead. You have to get like all of your bearings around you as soon as you spawn in because you have no protection, which is frankly just kind of annoying. So that's why you should have protection in your spawn. A very good example is Prototype 8. Now, you can get up into here, but it's pretty difficult to do, and not many people do it. The spawn itself, of course, you can see is very protected. You have this sniper ledge here. You have a ledge here to be able to shoot off of. You know, and for a spawn, you usually don't want the spawn to be the best part of the map. You know, this part should be a bit better overall, but this is very well protected for a spawn. You want your spawn to be clear. Now, the good news is that the less effort you put in, the more likely your spawn will be clear, just because you haven't filled it up with stuff. So most maps will tend to have pretty clear spawns just because people don't go crazy with the details. However, on the left here, if you do go crazy with the details, then you might not have a clear spawn. You can see on the map, on this map, that you really can't even tell where the spawn's supposed to be. I'll tell you that it's right here. But like, look how many camping spots there are. I can camp here, I can camp here, I can camp behind this, I can camp behind this, I can camp behind this, I can camp on top of here because there's no spawns on top of this walkway. I can camp in this corner, I can camp in this corner, camp in this corner, you know, camp behind this wall, camp behind this thing, and I'm super close to the spawn, so as soon as someone spawns in, I can hear them spawn in and just peek out from my camping spot and shoot them right in the face. This is bad. You do not want to clutter the spawn up with stuff, generally. You want to keep that to a minimum. It's okay to have some things there, just kind of depends, but you can have stuff there, I should say, you can have stuff there if it doesn't, if there's, you can still see. Like, if the spawns have visibility around all the stuff you have, then it's fine. But for this, like I said, there's a bajillion corners people can camp in that will never get seen by someone spawning in unless they literally just keep looking around for them, which people don't do. People just run straight forward as soon as they spawn. So don't make a spawn that's just completely filled with stuff. That's the only thing here. It's not common that someone does it, but when someone does it, it's just not good. So that's why I'm putting it in. This is Factory 2 Skillwarz, as you can see. And like I was saying, clear does not have to be boring. You can have stuff in the spawn area, but I will show you in a second, you just have to keep the visibility. So at this, this is the spawn area for a map, Night Ride Day in Skillwarz. It doesn't look very clear. We got a building here, we got a building here, we got all this type of stuff. But overhead view, what do we have? First of all, it's really not a whole lot. We got like one container, a couple things here. And you can see how the spawns are laid out. We got 2 people here, so someone can't camp. You can't really camp in the alley because there's a spawn right there. Up here, likewise, you can camp on top of this building, but you're going to get seen by the people that spawn up here. And you can't camp in this thing, and there's spawns under this, under the top floor of this also, because there's people that spawn here. You might be able to hide here for like a second, but it's not a very large distance. And if someone runs, forward, they're probably going to see you there. I'm not saying this is 100% perfect, but it's 95% there. There's very little spots in this spawn that are not visible by someone, but by people that spawn back in. So even though this map, spawn has some stuff in it, it's still clear enough to that I would say it's pretty clear. If we go back to the other map here, you can see this one is just, there's way too many places to camp compared to this. So clear does not have to be boring. I do want to make that point. You want your spawn to be defensible. We already went over this example. It's pretty obvious why this is not easy to defend. If all you can do is walk out or back in behind a wall, that's kind of the absolute minimum of defensibility, is having one wall with no head glitches, no cover, no anything. Another good example is this spawn here. You can run straight out the front here if you're just trying to get out, but if you do need some space to defend your spawn, you can camp up in these parts here, and there's actually spawns up on the top here, so you don't have to climb up here necessarily to defend from up here. So this is an excellent example of a very easily defensible spawn. And lastly, you want to have multiple exit routes. So here's Industry Town, a map in Skillwarz. Here's one spawn. Here's another spawn. The blue spawn. How can you get out? Well, basically you can go this way. That's 1. This is a tunnel that leads to here. That's 2. And you can go this way. That's 3. Red spawn. How can you get out? There's 1 that leads to this. And that's it. So, and this is long enough here that you'll be out of your spawn protection, certainly by the time you run out here. So someone can camp on the top of the stairs, someone can camp around this corner, and you're not really going to have a whole great of a chance getting out of the red spawn. So once again, this is, like I was saying, with keeping a map clear, usually people will just do this automatically. Usually people will just have multiple exit routes out of their spawn. But I did want to put it in because, once again, it is necessary. Do make sure your spawn has multiple viable exit routes. Prototype 1 here, you can go up here, you can go over here, you can go over here, that's 3. You can also camp in these towers, and that's usually you're not really going to have more than 3 different routes unless your map is pretty large or has a large number of routes to flow through, as we covered in the last video in flow. So here's a quick analysis. So I'm going to just talk about why, here's a real world example. This is not a map I made. This is, of course, Dust 2 is from CSGO, and I think a lot of other CS games, if I'm not mistaken. So what this individual did, LLight, is they just recreated Dust 2, and it's a pretty good recreation. It plays pretty well. But the thing is that most of the time people play this, they only have 1 life per round. In Skillwarz, which is what this map was ported to, you will usually play it on Team Deathmatch or something like that, where you have more than 1 life per round. If you only have 1 life per round, spawn's really not important because there's very little action in the spawn. You have to move out of your spawn to engage the enemy roughly in the middle of the map. And that's just how maps play when you only have 1 life at a time. If you can respawn, especially on a map with static spawns, the spawns do become important. So let's take a look here. Are the spawns protected? Once again, remember that I'm talking about for a respawn game mode. This is important. I know if you just play search and destroy on this or whatever, then some of these things are irrelevant. But for a respawn game mode, these are relevant. Are the spawns protected? Well, this one you spawn right in the open, so that's a no. This is definitely not a protected spawn. You literally spawn right in the middle of the street. This one here, you spawn under this, also just right next to a street, so this is really not protected either. It's very hard to protect this spawn. Are the spawns clear? Yes, more or less so. This one is very clear. It's pretty hard to camp directly around the spawn. I mean, you can camp behind this, but the spawn itself is pretty clear. This one is not, and the reason why is because someone can camp here, and someone coming out of their spawn should only have to look forward around the map, like left and right and forward. You should never have to look behind of like where you're spawning at. So for this, someone can camp here, someone can spawn in and have to make like 2 left turns to have to check this area if they're going that way. And people do camp here. I've played this map. So this spawn is really not that clear. And the reason why is because people can camp right next to the spawn, and you can't see them unless you check that on purpose, which is what clear means. Are these spawns defensible? No and no. Like I said, they're not really protected and defensible are 2 different things. You can have a protected spawn like on map 7 here. You have a big old wall, but it's not defensible. And you could theoretically have a defensible spawn that's not protected. You could spawn in the open but have very quick access to defensive positions. So this spawn is neither. It's not protected, and it's also not defensible. Once again, you just basically spawn in the open, which means both of those are probably going to be false. And multiple exit routes. These do have multiple exit routes. This one just has 2, which is directly out of the spawn, which is not great, but it's fine. This one has 3, which is better. Now, I'm only doing 2, so this is the other map here. And once again, this is for, so to help you be able to look at your own map and think to yourself how these, be able to apply these concepts to a map that you're looking at, maybe your own map. Instead of me just telling you what the concepts are, this is me describing how I would use these concepts to evaluate the spawn on a particular map. This is Nuketown by the 5 Bandits. Is the spawn protected? Kind of. I would actually say this is kind of protected. The reason why is because you have this big old house in front of it. So I'd say this is reasonably well protected. It could be a bit better, but it's basically fine. Is it clear? Once again, this is it is kind of clear. The reason why is because I marked on the map here approximately where the spawns are. You can see most of them are here, which means you can camp behind these barrels. And I wouldn't be saying this if I hadn't done it in actual games against people. This is not theoretical. It's something I've actually done. People almost certainly spawn here. So you can camp behind these barrels, or maybe camp behind this ramp here, and people, well, if you camp behind the ramp, they'll probably see if they run forward. But you can camp behind these barrels, and people run right past you. This is, once again, this is not theoretical. I've done this many times playing this map. So you really don't want to have stuff like just random barrels and stuff that serve no purpose in your spawn. That's something, it can just be as little as this that instantly makes your spawn less clear and just more annoying because you have something you have to check. So once again, for clarity, I recommend trying to have a very clear spawn with not a whole lot of weird campy stuff in it. Is it defensible? Kind of. Once again, this is a kind of. You do have this house right here. Now, this is a very small map overall, so defensibility is always going to be kind of, iffy. With the spawn protection and the defensibility is always going to be a bit iffy. I'd say this is reasonably defensible because you have this house here. The house itself is not a very good defensive position, but it does kind of fit the bill for your spawn. Basically within the duration of your spawn protection, you can get to this defensible position. So I'd say it's basically fine. In multiple exit routes, once again, this is pretty good. We got the left side, we got the right side, we got the whatever this thing is, and we got the house. So multiple exit routes, we're good to go on that. So overall, I probably should say these spawns, I would say, definitely need some improvement if I was going to port them. You need some protection and or defensibility, certainly. This one, it's okay-ish. It could be better, but it's probably not going to be particularly bad. Especially because this map is small, some chaos in the spawn is always going to be assumed to happen. The smaller your map is, the harder it is to apply these principles. So, in conclusion, for a protected spawn, don't place spawns in an open field or on a street. You want to, generally, you're going to want to have some walls or something. A good thing is to put them in a building or just some other area. Just have some walls in between the spawn zone and the rest of the map is basically all you need to do. Once again, I said put them in the building. Don't put them in like a building with hallways and all this type of stuff because no one will know what's going on as soon as they spawn in. That won't make it not clear. Put them in kind of an open building so people have something to spawn in that's not very exposed to the rest of the map, people looking in from the edges of the spawn or nearby, but we'll have some clarity there and so hopefully some defensibility also. Clarity is usually the easiest thing. You have to add stuff to your map to make it unclear. So don't do that. That's basically it. The general rule is don't add props in the spawn. Everywhere else is fine, but spawn is usually a no-no. And when I say spawn, I don't mean like in front of the spawn. For defensibility, that's fine. But don't put it like smack in the middle of the spawn where it's guaranteed to serve no purpose because the only purpose it will serve is allowing the enemies to camp in the spawn and making it harder to detect their presence there. Your spawn for defensibility would ideally be like a mini fortress. On many maps this is not practical and many times it's not necessary. But for good defensibility it is. It just kind of depends on the style of map you're making. If you want a more chaotic map, it's probably a bit better to have a not really defensible spawn. You still want it to be protected, you still want it to be clear, you still want to have multiple exit routes, but defensibility can kind of go out the window because the more defensible your spawn is, the more people will tend to camp in the spawn. So just keep that in mind. For kind of a tactical map, spawn defensibility is good. For a chaotic map, not super important. Like I said, for a defensible spawn, like I wrote on here, you don't want it to be the best place to camp on the map, but you want it to be competitive enough with other power positions on the map that it's not a lost cause. Even if you want to make a more rushing and chaotic map, so you want to lower the defensibility of the spawn, make sure to not put some type of crazy overpowered spot in the rest of your map, because otherwise people will just get spawn trapped, and that's no fun. The better the defensive spots are, the more people are going to use them, and the more people are camping, the less aggressive your map might play. I guess, if you have less defensibility in the spawn, then people are going to get spawn trapped, so you have to have less defensibility in another part of the map. And the last thing is to have multiple exit routes. You just need at least 2 minimum, ideally have 3. That's basically it. Like I said here, a single enemy should not be able to obtain a strong tactical position over every exit of the map simultaneously. You may be able to see every exit of the map, but by then you should be far too close to the spawn for you as the enemy to be safe. So that is my little spiel about spawns. I know this video is about half an hour long. I hope it was worth watching. A lot of times I will watch videos on 2x speed because I don't want to spend half an hour on it, and because people tend to talk slow anyway. I am reading off a PowerPoint, so I'm not exactly going to have the most, fast talking, prepared, down the most eloquently prepared presentation. It's going to sound more like a college lecture. but that's just kind of how it goes. You know, unfortunately, I don't have just all the time in the world to be able to make these, so I try to put something together and present over it pretty clearly. But I know there is maybe some redundancy or some whatever that might be in the video, but you know, I'm for right now, I really do just want to get. I'm not just trying to get it out there or whatever, but I do want to make these types of videos. Unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of time to refine or edit my content, but I do put a lot of time and effort into the content itself. You know, so like I'm saying, my presentation might be a bit slow. It might be, I might stumble in a couple places. I know I do that, but the content itself is I make and over the course of weeks or months, like this presentation here. So I like to think that it's, you know, I try to make it pretty well thought out and pretty comprehensive on what you need to know, which is why the video is sometimes kind of long. So if you made it this far, thanks for watching. I hope it wasn't terrible. I hope you learned a lot of useful things. If you have any questions or comments, please do be sure to put them in the comments, and I will catch you later. Thanks for watching.